Hi, and welcome to another edition of This Week in Evansville. I'm Johnny Kincaid. Thanks for taking the time to join us here today. And we've got a great show lined up today. We're going to be talking to some documentary producers that I'm just telling you what they've been doing is just mind-blowing. So we'll share that more about that in a minute. But first, I want to put out the call for prayer for a police officer in Evansville who may lose his sight in one eye as a result of an injury over the weekend. Police were responding to a domestic violence call, and the things got out of hand. The suspect wound up kicking both officers that were there responding to the call and hit one along the eye and causing damage, the major damage there. And so we're just praying for both officers and their families, and would appreciate you taking the time to do that. Maybe even join us on a Tuesday here at City Gate in Evansville for our Tuesday Pray for Evansville session. And we do that every Tuesday at noon. And we just want to put an open invitation out there for you to be able to come and join us. The address will be in the show notes for you. So definitely make some plans to join us. Now joining us, this is going to be great. Documentary producers, Mark and Amber Archer, and they have produced a documentary that I had a chance to look at that was honestly kind of disturbing. To be quite honest with you, and we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this whole thing in a couple of minutes here. But first, I want to welcome you guys. Thanks for taking the time to be here.
Thanks for having us, Johnny.
We appreciate it.
Yeah. Now, well, before we even get to the documentary itself, I just want to get to know a little bit about you guys, and we'll start with what were you guys doing before you started doing documentaries?
Boy, loaded question.
I'll let you take that one.
How deep do you want to go here, Johnny? Thumbnail sketch. So I grew up in the church and went to a good church, good Christian school, and I got my start in video production and eventually into film through the church. So our church has a television ministry, and that's where I first learned camera operating and then directing and editing and lighting and all that stuff. So I started very young and worked in film and television all through my 20s, 30s. Had a lot of early success in making independent films, went to Sundance, won Sundance, had a career after that. And but my personal life was always one of the prodigal. I was running from the Lord, trying to do things my own way. That led me into a lot of terrible life decisions, and I had found myself just really spinning out of control. And I had a failed marriage and pretty much a failed life, and I was stoking my addiction to pornography, and that led me to hanging out in places like strip clubs. And so in a strip club that I frequented, one night I met
Ta-da!
my future wife, who was not a believer. I was a Christian running from the Lord. She was not a believer, but the Lord was really calling her, and the Lord made the best of a really terrible situation, and we started dating. And you want to tell him the rest of the story there?
Well, we got married in 2008, and I was quickly drafted into the production scene. And
you came to Christ shortly after we met.
Came to Christ shortly after we met. And so the Lord's just had us on this journey. We get up early in the morning and we read scripture and we pray together. And it was, in 2017, the Lord was really impressing on us. Well, especially for me. And I looked at Mark and I said, I think we're supposed to be making movies. We continued on in this corporate production world he stepped away from filmmaking completely, went back and finished his engineering degree, and then I was doing senior portrait photography, and I needed marketing pieces, and I said, hey, do you know anybody that has a camera that could help me? And so that brought him back into the production world, and in 2017, the Lord was really working on the both of us. And I said to him, I said, I think we're supposed to be making movies. And that led to our first documentary film, Inwood Drive, that was about the local abortionist and his demise in our hometown of Fort Wayne, Indiana. And then after that, we were really praying for next steps, started our filmmaking ministry, Fearless Features, and then went on to produce The Mind Polluters. And again, these things, when we started this filmmaking ministry and just the walk and the journey that we've had with the Lord, it was always one of prayer and, um, Lord, break our hearts for what breaks yours. And so whatever happens, these films are a result and the fruits of the prayers and the obedience that we have to just following the Lord. And so we made The Mind Polluters, and The Mind Polluters has now it was translated into 2 languages. It's been seen in 145 different countries. We've been shipping to all 50 states. We've seen legislation. 5 states were actually able to use the film to help overturn and educate people to get involved to overturn the obscenity exemptions, which allows pornography in the schools. And so it's been a really incredible path and journey. And now here with Dysphoria, our current documentary that we're slowly releasing here in the state of Indiana first. It's been incredible, and to be able to touch people's lives already. We've had people from the homosexual community come to the screenings, and I was able to just share Christ. I mean, Christ is shared in all of our films. It's not like beating you over the head with it. It's not Bible thumpers, if you will, but just sharing the truth, because the truth is found in Scripture. And so everything, our firm foundation is biblical principles and values.
I actually lost the bet that I made with myself here with your story, because first of all, my guess was, when I listened to your podcast first time, and you guys have this great rapport that comes across. And see, I have a radio background. I spent 40 years doing morning radio, and love listening to people who team up well. So I went, these people have a radio background. I just know it.
No.
Hey, I did DJ when I worked in the club. I don't know if that counts.
I bet on that. And then my other bet that I lost was I was betting that you guys met in church. So I'm just off on every assumption that I made.
We are two broken souls that the Lord mended and put together. So.
The Lord will use anybody. The Lord, if you are willing to be obedient to the Lord, He'll use you.
That's very true. Absolutely. And I'm a broken soul as well, but we're not going to share my story here. We're all about you guys today. So let's just talk about dysphoria, because I'm telling you, I was just like in stunned silence at times watching this. So let's first of all let people in on the premise of this film.
Sure. So Dysphoria is about the transgender movement, and it's all of our films, like Amber said, all of our films are done from a Christian worldview. So we're making investigative documentaries, which means that they're heavily researched, and we don't take the same approach that most people do, I guess. What we've been told over and over again is, I've never seen anything like that. We just have a different perspective on things. So we ask the questions of, where did this come from? Why is it the way it is? And we do that by talking to people who are entrenched in it. And in the case of Dysphoria, we have 3 different families that we tell their stories, or they tell their stories of how the transgender agenda, if you will, has kind of taken over. And 2 of the stories, they managed to navigate out of it, and one of them tragically did not end up with a happy ending. But it's important to have that, I think, that balance, if you will, to show that it is a galactic battle that's going on. And so we ask the questions, we just keep asking the questions, why this, why this, why this, and what's causing it. And from a Christian worldview, you always are going back to what does the Lord say about these things. And so, as you've seen in the film, we go pretty deep into societally, where these things have come from, historically, where they've come from. We go back and talk about Alfred Kinsey once again, like we did in The Mind Polluters. We talk about John Money and Harry Benjamin, that were really the ones that started this way back in the 50s, but also what socio-political issues are driving this, and it comes down to communism, totalitarianism, and showing all the links to globalism and global tyranny, and so people who watch the film, what we've noticed is that people come to see the film multiple times because, as we say, they're very thick, right? So you pick up something a little different every time you watch it, and we understand that because it takes us a long time to get through this stuff as we put it down, and we're not the experts. We're just trying to string these pieces of information together for people and let people's stories they tend to fall on the bell curve, if you will. They tend to average out to having the same causes. So that's what dysphoria is. It's
In the 45 communist schools.
Talk about the 45 communist schools. We talk about
CPS,
Klaus Schwab, and child protective services, and Antifa, and all of how they all go together. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really amazing how the dots connect. I was really because it's multifaceted. There are a lot of different topics that you hit on there, but I think that to me the real impact comes when parents are talking about the fact that they could lose their kids, and when not because they're cruel to their children, but because they refuse um, to play into the fantasy that the kids have developed.
Right. And in this society, we're redefining everything. And we've talked many times on our podcast in the past about how in our generation growing up, that we started to see the beginnings of this relativism where everybody's right and nobody's wrong. And now it is manifest full scale, full force. And now we're literally redefining everything. And what it leads to, the reason why there's so much despair and, high suicide rates is because we're confusing our children, because our generation embraced relativism where there's no absolutes, and you cannot, as a human, you can't live without absolutes. It's contrary to the nature of the universe. And so the relativism of our generation has led to the outright confusion. And so speaking of the parents who are losing their children to this, is because this is infected all the way up through the ranks of the courts, to where now we're redefining what's right and wrong, even at the legal and court level. So people look at it and say, well, they didn't abuse their children. Well, it depends on now who's defining what abuse is. And that's right. The problem.
Yeah.
That's where we're at.
It's and as we move along generationally, I keep pointing out to people the generational differences that exist in how people handle different things, and this falls into that category. You know, I'm a little older than you guys, so you know, I was raised with, you know, television wasn't a really big thing, even, you know, as I was coming up as a kid. I mean, TV was a big deal. Oh my gosh, TV, um, but it wasn't the electronic babysitter that it became as we've kind of progressed through things. And I realized how prevalent that is with my grandson, who's now just a little over 2 years old. And my daughter is like a whiz when it comes to brain development. That's the thing that she really hones in on, and she realizes how television alters synaptic connections in a kid's brain. So he hadn't been watching any television. She held off on that until he was at least 2, and then he gets very, very limited doses of anything now. But you know, there are people who take their kids as infants and just sit them down in front of the tube, and you can watch the kid just kind of zone out. And um, you know, we're allowing others to raise our
Yeah.
kids
Yeah.
without even realizing
Yeah.
it.
Well, the same dangers are there, even as we show through dysphoria with the social media and the various platforms that kids are using. And, you know, if we don't speak to our kids, the world will. And if you really want them to have a biblical foundation and a Christian worldview, you have to discuss these things because the world is discussing them with them. And, you know, and almost being mandatory that it be taught and learned in schools now. So definitely just understanding what your children are reading, watching, consuming, you know, who are their trusted adults.
Hmm. We went through the whole. Everybody got up in arms over one of our state senators from the Evansville area, Jim Thomas, introducing a bill last legislative session in Indiana to prohibit certain books from, you know, that might be harmful to the development of children from being in the library. And you'd have thought that, you know, that he was banning Tom Sawyer or something. I mean, you know, because everybody wanted to talk about the big book ban and stuff. Um, but that wasn't where he was going at all with it. But it's society has done such a flip.
Yeah, and in fact, you know, we have followed his efforts over the past couple of years, and um, in our prior film, The Mind Polluters, we show part of that legislative process because we were in Indianapolis and also in Lincoln, Nebraska, in the state house documenting those testimonies, and because it was all about the obscenity exemptions in state law in 43 states is what it was originally. And it basically, you know, the obscenity exemptions are what has been used as the loophole to push all this stuff through. And those exemptions were originally put in with the intention of protecting the sciences, right? So that if you were going to teach anatomy, for example, in university level, that you weren't going to risk being charged with uh, distributing pornography if you were teaching anatomy to medical students or nursing students, for
Mm-hmm.
example, right? And everyone understood that, but it's now been taken and twisted, of course, because now we're in this society of relativism, and so it's been taken and twisted to mean, well, that means I can show kindergartens pornography, and so now it has to be remedied.
The Your work on dysphoria is just again, it's not only from um, a storytelling standpoint, but down to the technical aspects of the video, or it's done with real class. You guys did a great job on it, and um, it's coming to Evansville January 14th. That's a Sunday evening, and looking forward to that, to more people seeing it. I appreciate you letting me screen it ahead of time. And I want to make sure that people mark that date on their calendar, because this is going to be huge. We'll put the ticket information and time and all of that into the show notes so that everybody can have that information. But before we go too much further here, I really want people to get a feel for the video, for the film. So we're going to just go ahead and drop in the trailer for it here.
You don't have to be a rocket scientist to connect the dots here and see where this is going. They are going to intrude in families. It's going to get much worse. It has already started. Unless and until people put their foot down, it's going to get really, really ugly.
When you first research this issue, the only things that come up are affirm your child. This is a really significant issue that your child has now fallen into.
This is evil. This is absolute evil that is coming at our kids. And if our faith community is not going to stand between that evil and our children, I don't know what hope we have.
There's absolutely no way that we could have gotten from 2015 to 2018 where we had transgender everywhere, okay? It took them almost 15 years to get gay marriage. Well, it took them 3 to 5 years to get this transgender stuff.
When you stand by and do nothing, then you are essentially saying, I'm okay with the human carnage and the human suffering that is coming from this transgender, gender ideological agenda.
This is something that is affecting families in possibly every congregation in America.
The way that the devil and his forces lose this is by speaking truth.
God will not hold us guiltless for our cowardice, and that's what it is. It's cowardice in the pulpit. It's cowardice in our churches. It's cowardice from Christians in government.
Do what you're doing for the generations to come. Do your job.
So there's just a little example of what you're going to see, just a sampling from the documentary Dysphoria. Again, it's coming to Evansville on January 14th. We are talking to the producers of that documentary, Mark and Amber Archer. And I want to go to one of the moms that we see there, because, there's this thing just tugs at your heartstrings. When a mom is talking about their child comes home from school, and without the mom knowing about it, the child has been told to give into this feeling that you are not the right sex biologically and that you can be whoever or whatever you want to be. And the mom's left completely out of that process. And then when the mom learns about it, it becomes a major problem from there, because the reaction from the schools isn't to support the parent whose role it really is to raise that child. Instead, the school's there, saying, well, we could call CPS on this over this. And, that becomes one of the options that they look at, is that the child would be removed from the home.
Mm-hmm.
That's just mind-boggling to me.
Well, that's actually already in place in places like Washington, and California tried it, but they did not pass that. But in the state of Washington, they can remove your children if you don't agree with the transgender identity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's already happening.
It is without a doubt, it is the plan. As one of the cast members talks about, Bernadette Broyles, who's in the film, she's an attorney who deals in this all the time, and she says it very succinctly that CPS is the leading edge of this agenda. This is their plan, and there's the reason why it's so important in Dysphoria that you understand all of these different elements is because to understand the CPS angle with the schools, trying to basically steal children, and remove them from the home, and that, well, this is a communist ideology mindset. So you need to understand what that is. A lot of people frankly don't even know what communism is anymore. So we have to kind of educate people. Hey, this has been around for a while. It's always a disaster. It always leads to tyranny and death. And here's what they have said in the past. And by the way, you're living in the middle of they're almost done with their plan. And so you have to understand that's where this comes from. But also, they've been very adept at how they target kids. There are kids that will never buy into this, and they know that. But there are also kids, and one of the themes that you hear through it is that the quirky kids, a lot of them are on the autism spectrum. Not all, but kids who are malleable, if you will, that are kind of more susceptible to suggestion, or maybe kids that are from difficult home life, things like that. Those are the ones that they go after, and that's they're not smart, they're devious. These leftist communists, they know exactly who they're after. And so and the one mom talks about her daughter fell victim to this in an hour and a half. It wasn't months or years, it was an hour and a half class that they
Art club.
It was an art club class. And it was all deception because they called it art club, but what it really was GSA. Used to be Gay Straight Alliance, now it's Gender
Sexuality
Awareness Club. And in that 90 minutes, they convinced her daughter that she was transgender.
What's the end game to that, though? I mean, really, where are they trying to take it?
Well, control of society.
Yeah, it's control. I mean, there's and again, there's a lot of angles to that. There's a lot of vested interests there. So you can talk about the totalitarian control aspect, where if they can confuse you enough and if they can convince you that your gender is fluid, then they can convince you that your humanity is fluid. There's this globalist agenda to push everybody into transhumanism, right, where they want to implant things in your brain and under your skin and all this. And biblically, we know that these are all things that are leading towards what we know is coming in the end times with the Antichrist. Some of them, if you want to talk about big pharma, for them it's a gold mine, right? The patience for life, right? Patience for life. So get these kids to where they have to have these drugs, or they think they have to have them, and even the ones that come out of it, they're damaged forever. So there's a lot of reasons for it, but the simple explanation for a Christian is, what does the Lord say? Now flip it on its head, and that's what they're doing.
I sometimes the other part of this is that people don't realize is that this isn't just a new development, that it's something that's been going on over the course of time, but it's that the time frame gets accelerated as we go along. That the things that we thought were absolutely unthinkable when I was growing up in the 60s are now completely mainstream. And now also the things that people thought were unthinkable 5 years ago have become mainstream. It's going faster and faster. The amount of time for people to really start adapting these agendas has just, that time frame is so short now.
Yeah. Which is why it's so important with films like these that people see them and come with an open mind to try to understand why. If you have to understand why it's happening before you can do anything about it, right? And so that's why we do these films, and we're trying specifically, you've seen the films, we are speaking to the church, because if the church, if God's people don't get informed and engaged in culture again instead of sitting on the sidelines, then nothing's going to change. And the Lord told us that things were going to go from bad to worse, but he also spoke very clearly to what arguably is the church of the end times, the last church age, which is the church at Laodicea. And the lukewarm church that sat around and did nothing. They were lukewarm. And I think that's what we're seeing. And we're trying with these films to wake people up and to turn up the heat under the lukewarm church and get them boiling again.
So you've obviously made a major investment in producing this documentary, and this is kind of an unusual method of releasing. What's happened with this release for Dysphoria?
Well, what you said that it heavily invested. So these films, all three of our films that we have made, we've started with $0. And we are funded through our nonprofit Fearless Features to make these films. And the majority of our the giving comes from one-time donations. And so it's been an interesting battle for us because we're not always invited into churches to actually speak to the people who are going to be willing to help support missionaries like ourselves. I mean, we do this full time. We don't have any other jobs. We research, we produce these films. And so it's been a challenge, but the Lord has been so faithful through his people. The Lord has been faithful and allowed us to get, from one step to the next. And it's one of those things where on this journey, we continue to learn new things every time. Through the last film, we realized, the impact it could make and the way that we released it. But that's not what the Lord's calling us to do with this one. And so we're being obedient, really. And we know that a lot of people don't understand, but it's just what the Lord has called us to. And so whatever the Lord has planned, we're gonna watch it unfold.
Well, it's also too because with our prior film, The Mind Polluters, what we saw, we partnered with a lot of grassroots organizations. And what we saw was that the film became kind of a rally point for people to gather and like-minded individuals to gather and to start to connect and work together and get things done. And we were happy to see that happen. But with this film, we said, you know what, we want to be part of that instead of just putting it out and moving on to the next thing. So our plan with Dysphoria for the foreseeable future is to do screenings like this so that we can be there and we can connect with people, because there is more that can be done after you watch the film and you're kind of sitting there in stunned silence a lot of times. Then you need someone to kind of pick you up and say, okay, now here's what can be done. And we want to be there to be part of that and to pray with people and to give them additional tools and advice, if you will. This is now now what are the next steps? So that's why it is a little bit unusual, but it's we're following, like Amber said, we're following where we believe the Lord is leading us with this.
So you're going to travel around the state of Indiana first, and then kind of expand and move out from there.
Exactly. So eventually, it will have a wide release eventually, but for the foreseeable future, we're making these very specific and very, I guess, exclusive. I mean, it's not
deliberate.
Exclusive. All you got to do is come. But yeah.
Well, I would think that a lot of this now kind of calls for getting the right people in the seats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That what you want are people who aren't just going to sit there in stunned silence, but are going to go, I need to do something about this. I need to become involved. I am certainly going to be talking this event up everywhere that I go over the next few weeks, because I think that it's really imperative that we get pastors there, that we get leaders of all kinds to come and see it. I'll be actually sharing it with some of our members of the city council, see if any of them might want to come, because I think it's an important message, and you guys did a terrific job of conveying that message.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate your time very much, and time goes quickly when you don't know what you're doing. So this has flown by. Anyway, thank you guys very much. We'll be looking forward to seeing you on January 14th.
All right,
We're
thanks for
looking
having
forward
us.
to coming down south. We
Yeah.
appreciate the invitation.
Be sure to get the information on tickets from the show notes, and also subscribe and like this podcast so that you're informed when new episodes come about. Thanks for joining us for This Week in Evansville.